All right, folks, up next, he's been kind of teasing what he's been working on this whole kind of 6 months now, maybe longer. You folks ready? Give it up for Taylor Otwell.
All right, thank you for coming to Laracon US 2019, our seventh and biggest Laracon, really the biggest Laracon ever in the United States or Europe so far. So thank you so much for supporting the community, and thank you for coming out for another awesome event. Quick announcement after my talk, we will have 2 hours of food, drinks, which are on me basically for the first hour, and lots of food, so please stay and enjoy that food. I think it's going to be really good. And then if you have a ticket for Laracon After Dark, that's a separate event at 8:30 at Lucky Strike Bowling on 42nd Street. There is bowling, ping pong, pool, and there's also just a lot of space to hang out. So if you're not into bowling, don't feel like you have to avoid the event. Come and hang out and chat with the community. So I have quite a bit to cover today, so I'll just kind of hop right into it. And the first thing I want to talk about is sort of Laravel itself. And as you may know, the next release of Laravel is due in August. Laravel is on a 6-month release schedule, so the last release was in February. So that puts the next one right around the end of August. And so let's talk about that a little bit to get started. So as you know, we've been on the 5.0 release of Laravel for about 4 years now. And Laravel 5.0 was released in February 4th, 2015. And since that time, a lot has happened. Actually, a whole lot has happened. So here are some things that did not exist when Laravel 5.0 came out. And raise your hand if you've used one of these tools. Laravel Horizon, Laravel Nova, Laravel Echo, Laravel Scout, Laravel Passport, Valet, Dusk, Socialite, Telescope, notifications as a concept in Laravel, mailables in Laravel, model factories did not exist, authorization policies did not exist. So a whole lot has happened since Laravel 5.0, and it's kind of crazy. You kind of take for granted a lot of these things that we use every day that didn't exist just a short time ago. Countless community packages have been written in those years. Staff members for Laravel have been hired. Back then, I was the only person working on Laravel full-time. Since then, we've brought on Mohammed first a few years ago. Yeah, give it up for Mohammed. So Mohammed's done a great job of kind of holding down the commercial side of Laravel, our products like Forge and Envoyer and Spark. And then we recently brought on Dries Vince, who's here. Give it up for Dries. So Dries has been holding down the fort on the other side of the spectrum, the open source stuff, and lately that's been a lot of cashier work. But I'm really thankful to have those 2 guys on board, and they've really allowed me to work on a lot of the cool new stuff that I'm going to show you today. And I also want to announce that we're bringing on a 3rd Laravel team member, James Brooks. He'll be starting next week, actually, so I think he'll probably start looking at some Laravel Nova stuff to start, but I'm sure he'll bounce around into all of our whole ecosystem, basically. Yeah. So instead of the next release being Laravel 5.9, I've decided to go ahead and make the jump to semantic versioning for the framework for itself, and we'll be shipping Laravel 6.0 in August. Now, that being said, will Laravel 6.0, does 6.0 indicate that it will be a paradigm shifting release that forces you to rewrite all your code? No. It will likely be just like the typical Laravel releases you're used to. The main difference is the switch to the different versioning scheme. So in previous releases of Laravel, we used sort of our own versioning scheme for the framework itself. All of the components were already semantically versioned, like Cashier, Telescope, Nova. All that stuff is already semantically versioned. And we used to use that first number in the version, like the 5, to indicate sort of the era of Laravel, so to speak, where era represented this whole, basically a full rewrite almost of the underlying framework. Because the framework was young, it was changing a lot in the early days, especially from 1 to 2 to 3 to 4. That happened in quick succession. And we were sort of finding our footing in terms of the right architecture we wanted to adopt for the framework. But I really feel like with this 5.x series, I'm just really happy with the way that whole architecture turned out with service providers and middleware, the way the container works. And I think moving to 6.0 is more just like a stamp of approval on that as sort of a solid architecture to move into the future with for years to come, and not place as much emphasis on sort of the first number of that version. So does this mean that we'll have big paradigm shifting releases? No, but I think it just gives kind of more consistency in the ecosystem with the rest of the packages, and sort of is less surprising when you come to Laravel to have to remember this custom versioning scheme. You can just use semantic versioning. So that does mean that any breaking change would necessitate a new version. So that means next spring there will be like a Laravel 7.0, eventually an 8.0. Again, that doesn't mean that you're going to have to rewrite all your stuff. It's just the versioning scheme we're adopting. But hopefully that just gives you one less thing to think about when you are thinking about Laravel. Now, let's talk about the branding of Laravel. As some of you may know, with each major release of Laravel, we've actually given it a fresh design treatment, if you've been around the Laravel community for a while. So like Laravel 1 to 2 to 3, the websites were different. The logos actually look slightly different. Different people design the websites. And in the past, and probably this is the case with a lot of open source projects, that's sort of a volunteer effort, right? We didn't have a lot of resources to pour into sort of marketing design. It was all sort of me coaxing people to help me with the design, like bugging someone like Jack McDade to help me with the website and stuff like that. So now that Laravel is more mature and we have sort of a budget to pour into these things, I really wanted to work with a top-notch design firm to give Laravel a fresh look going into Laravel 6.0. It's been a while, actually, it's been years. And I chose to work with Focus Lab. They're one of the top digital design agencies in the United States. And we spent weeks sort of poring over the history of Laravel, what it's looked like in the past, how we can sort of iterate that in a way that still pays homage to the past and not sort of just do away with everything. And so we actually have a fresh new logo treatment, a fresh logo type treatment, and actually a brand new website that I want to show you now. So first, let me show you the fresh logo type, the version number. I think Focus Lab did a really good job on this. The original logo of Laravel was actually 3 Lego bricks on the Laravel 1.0 website. And the logo has always kind of riffed on that ever since then, and this obviously pays homage to that. There's echoes of the previous logos here, but just kind of brings it into one plane and tightens everything up a little bit. And I really like the custom logo type they built for this as well. So I think that turned out really well. And as I said, we did a new website treatment for the framework, which I think turned out really nice. So we've got this nice animation here in the header. Again, with the logo, we've got nice subtle animation with these building blocks floating around the page as you scroll down. Just highlighting all the different parts of Laravel, which is a lot now, a lot of components, and you can hop into any of those. Highlighting some parts of the community, which we can kind of swap out and rotate as people build cool things to show what the community's doing. And then, of course, showing our Laravel partners, which are the development agencies that we sort of recommend if you need Laravel work done. Of course, with the new web page, we have really beautiful documentation. I care a lot about documentation. I get really obsessed with it. So we made sure the documentation looks really beautiful. No matter what size your screen is, you get a nice, clean reading experience, good typography, good fonts, all of that. So it's really great to use, and of course, still the fast search provided by Algolia. So that is the new website. I'm really happy with how that turned out, and I hope you like it as well. All right, so swapping back to my presentation here. Yeah, on this topic, you may have noticed you haven't gotten your t-shirts yet. Justin joked that we didn't do t-shirts this year, and in a sense that is true. We didn't do Laracon t-shirts, but we did do Laravel 6 t-shirts for everybody. So you will all get a fresh Laravel 6 t-shirt. On the sleeve, you have the new 6 logo here, and then on the back, Laravel, and of course on the front, the new Laravel logo. So when you go out for the after party here to get food, all go get your food and drinks, and then we're going to set up the shirts here on the stage, organized by size, and then after you get some refreshments, you can file back in and pick up your fresh Laravel 6 t-shirt. All right, so what else does the future of Laravel hold? That's what I want to talk about for the rest of my time. And if you stuck around Laravel for a little while, you know I love to keep Laravel ahead of the curve, so to speak. So we were the first major PHP framework to introduce queues into the core of the framework. The first major PHP framework to embrace middleware in the core of the framework. The first major framework to have real-time event broadcasting right there in the core of the framework. The first official OAuth 2 server part of the framework. And the first major framework to ship a powerful notification system right in the core. So I love to try to be forward-thinking with Laravel. A lot of that comes from my own experience building apps with Laravel and kind of dog food in the framework and seeing where does it fall short, where do I want it to improve upon, and going from there. And right now I want to talk about the ways you get your Laravel application into production. So right now there's basically one official product you can use to get your application into production, and that's Laravel Forge. And if you haven't used Forge, Forge is a tool that you sign up for, like a SaaS monthly build product. You connect your DigitalOcean, your AWS account, your Linode account, and it provisions servers on those services for you. And it installs PHP, it installs MySQL, it installs Redis. It does all of that server stuff for you and gives you kind of a control panel for managing that server. And Forge is a really amazing product for a lot of people. And matter of fact, we have new features coming for Forge this year that we have planned. And some of the things that Forge does well is painless VPS management. This was really a hassle for me before Forge. I had a lot of scripts laying around that I would use to configure stuff. It was just a pain. Perfect for small and medium projects. Really easy to throw up, you know, a project you did for a client on a Forge server and have it out in the world really quickly. Basic load balancing is even part of Forge. So you can spin up a load balancer, balance between a small handful of servers pretty easily, and distribute traffic to those servers. And one benefit is you maintain full server access on Forge, so that since the servers live on your DigitalOcean or your Amazon account, you can SSH into them, you have full root access to them, and you can customize them however you want. And a lot of people are really happy with this, but for years people have been asking, is there something else that would be better for larger projects that need a little more? Things like auto-scaling. I don't want to have to think about what if my site receives this burst of traffic and I'm not ready for it and I'm down and it's really embarrassing. Something that's a little more managed. You know, with Forge, you still have to worry about operating system updates, your PHP going out of date, things like that. And I've thought about this for actually a really long time. And matter of fact, a couple years ago, I wrote an entire product called Laravel Cloud, which I kind of hinted at the last time we were here in New York. And I actually finished the whole product, and it was kind of like a Forge Pro, so to speak, where you could connect your DigitalOcean account or your Linode account, specify how many web servers, how many worker servers you wanted, and it would scale them based on those numbers in your configuration file. And when I got done with it, I just didn't feel like it was revolutionary enough. It just didn't blow me away. Steve did the whole front end for the product. We had the whole back end built. And I actually just tabled the whole product, even after it was finished. And I wanted something that just really blew me away, that felt really next generation for deploying PHP applications. So for the last 9 or 10 months, that's what I've been working on, 40 hours a week. I've been heads down trying to solve this problem. And what I've come up with is something that I'm calling Laravel Vapor. And Laravel Vapor is definitely ready for scale. So this is me bumping up to 5,000 users using an application. The purple line you can see is requests per second, and the green line is the number of users scaling up. This is just over a couple minutes. And you can see the response time down there, not even breaking a sweat at this load, so no problem at all. So we made over 500,000 requests in these few minutes with an average response time of 12 milliseconds. We're making a lot of requests to this Vapor application. It's no problem at all. It's really great. All right, so instead of talking more about it, why don't I just show it to you and we can take a look at it. All right, so I have been hiding this Vapor marketing page for quite a while, but let me just pull that up for you now. All right. So this is the landing page for Laravel Vapor. Similar to Forge, it is a hosted platform that you can link your AWS account and gives you an entire serverless deployment platform for Laravel, finely tuned for Laravel. We even made small tweaks within Laravel itself secretly over the last few months to make sure this experience was really seamless, really nice. I think you'll really like it. So you may have seen tools for PHP to put applications in a serverless environment, but you haven't seen anything quite this fleshed out yet, which I think you'll really like. So deployments, databases, caches, queues, cloud storage, asset management, DNS, certificates, metrics. We're going to look at all this today as we dive into Vapor. So before I really get into the app too far, I want to just stop for a second and say, what is serverless? Because I don't want to take it for granted that every one of you is familiar with serverless as a concept. So serverless is sort of this new hot tech that's been trending over the past few years, driven by cloud providers like Amazon with their Amazon Lambda offering, driven by Google with Google Cloud Functions, and Microsoft has their own offering. And the idea behind serverless is that you deploy to their platform and you never worry about your infrastructure. Now, of course, there are servers somewhere in Amazon that run your code, of course. But you never think about it. You never think about even the underlying operating system really, updating it. You never think about updating your PHP version. You never think about managing your certificates. And you never even think about how much scale does my application need to handle, because it all elastically scales on demand really quickly to handle literally incredible scale. So in the past, you might have used something like Horizon when managing your queues, where you want to say, I want 20 Horizon processes working queue jobs, and if 400 jobs come in, then those 20 processes sort of pick them off the queue and work them. With Vapor, you don't even have to really guesstimate your processes. You deploy your application. If you get 1,000 jobs on your queue, those jobs are going to be executed literally within seconds. I mean, really, really quickly, and you didn't have to do anything. If no jobs are on the queue, nothing's happening. There's no workers that you're out there managing. It's all totally elastically scaling on demand. All right, so let's go ahead and log into Vapor here. Vapor.laravel.com/login. All right, hopefully you can see this okay. So if I log into Vapor, I can see my projects and some of the recent activity that's happened on my Vapor account. And Vapor is also built around teams from day one. So right now I'm on my personal team, which is the team that's created when I first signed up for Vapor. But you can create as many teams as you want. You don't have to pay extra for teams. And you don't actually, one single plan gives you unlimited deployments, unlimited teams, unlimited users, unlimited projects. There's no extra paying for that. So you can create other teams to organize your projects by client or whatever you want to do. And then you can add users to those teams. In your team settings, you have really fine-grained control about what each team member can do. Can they create databases? Can they delete databases? All the way down the line across every resource that Vapor manages. And you can see your team members here. So let's hop back over to the project screen. And it's worth stating here that Vapor itself is running entirely on Vapor. So this is an entirely serverless Laravel application that we'll be interacting with throughout this demo. So if we drill into this project, which I have here, you can see that the project has multiple environments, as well as the recent deployments for each environment. So the cool thing about Vapor is each environment gets its own Vanity URL. So you can see right here under production, I have that snowy hurricane and then kind of a random token .vapor.build. And I can access that URL and see my application. So this is really nice because typically if you deploy to a serverless environment, you don't really have any kind of staging domain to interact with your application with. Vapor gives you these staging domains for free, basically, and it lets you immediately access your application with a really nice domain that you can share with your coworkers or whatever until you're ready to actually assign a custom domain to the application. So it's a really nice way to get started. All right, so we also add when someone accesses this vanity domain, we add the no index headers to the response to avoid these vanity domains getting picked up by search engines and stuff like that. All right, so before we go any further, let's talk about how do we deploy on Vapor. So we have this production environment. How do we actually push fresh code onto Vapor? So if I go on my command line, this is my project. Actually, my little dummy project will be deploying Vapor Laracon. And to deploy, I just do Vapor deploy production. And what that's going to do, it's going to do a bunch of stuff in my console, but I'm just going to hop back out here into the website because we can view it there too once it gets going. So first it's going to build the project and upload it. It's going to upload my assets to CloudFront so they're on a CDN, and then it's going to kick off the back-end deployment process here on Vapor. I can see every step that runs, what it's doing to get my application out in production. This is all with zero downtime, so it's just like Envoyer. When you're deploying, your users are not going to get any error pages, anything like that. It's all going to be zero downtime, so they can keep using the application as normal. So you can see this is already finished deploying out into the serverless environment, and of course we can, again, use that Vanity URL to access it. So really quick to deploy from the command line. If you wanted to deploy like a different environment like staging, you would just do Vapor deploy staging, and you're good to go. So a lot of things happen during deployment, and how did Vapor know what to do during the deployment? That's all controlled from a configuration file in your project. So I'm going to hop over to that dummy project, and there is a vapor.yaml file here, which just has the name of the project, and then it has my different environments in it. And in production, you can see I have some build steps. So this is what Vapor did before it sent my application out into AWS and installed my composer dependencies, and it does this all in a temporary directory within the project that it deletes when it's done. And maybe it cached my events, and you can do whatever else you want to do to sort of prepare your project to go out to be deployed. And then, as I mentioned, it automatically extracted our assets, and because Vapor's fine-tuned for Laravel, it knows where to find your assets. It extracts them all out of that public directory. It puts them on S3. It configures CloudFront. All of that behind the scenes is happening that you don't have to think anything about. You just can take advantage of it. All right, so that's the Vapor configuration file. Now, if I want to look at my assets real quick, I'll show you what I mean by how they're on a CDN. So if I go to this login screen for Laravel, and I inspect the source, you can see that right here there's a CloudFront URL. So all I did to generate this URL was use the asset helper in Laravel. When Vapor's running my Laravel application, it injects an asset URL environment variable. So any URL I generate using that helper automatically is pointing to the right CloudFront distribution, and my assets just work as you would expect. So it's really seamless. All right, what if we want to roll back a deployment? We can actually do that right in the Vapor UI. So if I come to an environment and I take a look at my recent deployments, I've been doing a lot of test deployments backstage because I was making sure everything was working. And say we want to roll back to this deployment right here. We just click on the deployment, roll back to, roll back. That's going to start a fresh deployment. It's going to run some steps. And boom, we're already rolled back atomically with no downtime. All right, what if I want to put an application in maintenance mode? For example, like when you're building a Laravel application, you might use PHP Artisan down to put the application in maintenance mode. Well, here there are no servers. It's all dynamically scaling. You don't have to worry about any servers, so how do we do this? Well, this is also built right into the Vapor UI. So I can actually do it right here from this little menu on the production environment, enable maintenance mode. I just click that, confirm that action. That again is going to fire off sort of a fresh deployment for that, indicating that we're in maintenance mode right here with the badge. It's going to update our code on AWS. All right, looks like we're active. Now, I want to show you something that I think is pretty cool. If I visit this Vanity URL, let me close that tab, I can still access the application. But let's look at my Vapor YAML configuration file. You can see that I've assigned a custom domain to the production environment, just an extra domain I had lying around called scenery.io. If I try to access that URL, I get the typical Laravel maintenance mode screen. So that's really nice because your users that are accessing the application using the actual URL, they get your maintenance mode screen, which of course can be customized. And you, as the developer, you can still access the entire application from the Vanity URL, which is not indexed and is hidden. So it gives you a way to manipulate your application, log in, make sure everything looks okay before you disable maintenance mode, which I can do straight from the Vapor UI. All right, so I'll come back to that environment. Again, we can see those recent deployments, the rollback, the maintenance mode. We can just disable maintenance mode right here from the menu. It's going to fire off a deployment, update our code. All right, and that is active. And so if we hit this URL, we're out of maintenance mode, and we're back up and running. So really easy to manage that directly from the UI. What about environment variables? How do we manage that? So I think what you'll find with Vapor is you actually manage environment variables a lot less than you used to using other things because we know so much about your application. As we'll see, we can automatically inject database environment variables for you. You'll see later we can automatically inject cache environment variables for you. We automatically inject queue environment variables for you. So you'll find that you actually think about environment variables a lot less. And the main ones you think about are sort of your third-party services. So for example, if I'm using something like Pusher or Bugsnag or whatever else, all those environment variables can be managed right here in the text box in Vapor. I will rotate these keys afterwards. These are just test accounts. But you can manage them right here. And you can see I don't have as many as you might expect to see in a normal Laravel environment file because I'm not having to worry about so much of them because they'll all be automatically injected. But anyway, you can update them here, save them. They won't take effect until you actually deploy. So if you don't have any fresh code to deploy, say you just wanted to change an environment variable and you didn't really need to change the code, you can just hit redeploy on the active environment, and that will actually just redeploy the current code, but it will update the environment variables and any other sort of secrets, which we'll see later, that you have for the application. So that's just a quick way to update the environment variables straight from the Vapor UI without pushing to GitHub or whatever. All right, so secrets, while we're on the topic of environment variables. Secrets are kind of like environment variables, but when you're running on AWS Lambda, you're limited in terms of how long your environment variables can be to 4 kilobytes. So if you're using like something like Passport, those private keys, those are really long private keys. Secrets have no limit on them, and they're encrypted at rest. So you can add those right here in Vapor with just like a name and a value. So like foo and bar, add that secret. Those are versions. You can see right here, current version 1. So what that means is if I deploy with current version, let's say 2, out into production, and I roll back, it will actually use whatever version of the secret that deployment was originally using. It's sort of locked in with that deployment. So when I roll back, it uses the previous version of the secret. So it all sort of rolls back together. But anyway, when I redeploy this application, foo will be available as an environment variable just like any other environment variable. All right, so I'm just going to delete that because we don't really need it. Let's kind of dig into some of these other tabs. Let's check out the commands tab. So commands are a way to sort of run one-off artisan commands against your serverless application. Again, there's no servers to SSH into. This is all auto-scaling. We're not thinking about servers at all anymore. Those days are over, basically, hopefully. So I can just run a command right here, for example, like, I don't know, the PHP artisan inspire command. It executes really quickly. I can see the output here, and this command didn't write anything to the logs, of course, but if it did write to the logs, we could see that information right there. All right, so it's just a really quick way. Sometimes you just have a situation where you want to run the migrate command against staging or whatever. Really quick way to do it right from the UI without like adding it to your deploy steps, blah, blah, blah. All right, so again, I make one fail. Like I have this fail command that I wrote in this dummy application that just throws an exception. So you can say it says finish with errors. And if we look at my dummy application at route/console, the fail, you can see it just threw an exception that something went wrong. And then if we hop into that in Vapor, we can see that output, and we can also see the log message that was written out, so we can sort of debug what happened with that command. So really easy to fire off these one-off commands against a serverless application. All right, let's move on to metrics. So this is something that is not offered in something like Forge. This is a little bit more of an advanced feature where you can get actually really nice metrics on any environment in Vapor. So you can see how many HTTP requests have I gotten in the last 24 hours? How many CLI invocations have I had? what's the average duration of those things? And actually, how much has it cost me on Lambda to do this? And you can see over the last 24 hours, I've had a few thousand things, and it cost me a couple pennies, actually, on Lambda to do that. We can expand out over the last 30 days. And you can see I've had, I don't know, maybe 600,000 total invocations between HTTP and Q. That cost me a couple bucks on Lambda and the average duration for those things. You can see sort of a nice chart, which this demo application has not gotten a lot of use, so let me scale this back down a little bit. How many HTTP requests I've gotten? Not many until recently. How much the duration is taking, so I can see, you know, if I made a deployment and I see this chart spiking up, that means I probably deployed some bad code that's running a lot slower. Same thing on the queue side, how many invocations, and then how long are those queued jobs or CLI commands taking to run on average. All right, so really nice, and we can get this across a variety of time periods. All right, now there's also alarms on this screen, so this is really nice where I can configure an alarm to say, like, hey, if I'm receiving more than 100 requests per minute, which is not a lot, for at least 5 minutes, then I want you to email me. Or it could send a Slack message, or it could send you a webhook. Those are sort of our 3 notification channels. So I can save that alarm and maybe configure another one for the queue. If I get more than 100 per minute for 5 minutes, email me. And now I'll get an email if any of those thresholds is broken, so I can know to kind of dig in and see what's going on in my application. So really easy to be notified about the health of the application right from the Vapor UI. All right, I'm going to get rid of those. So logs. So you can view your recent logs, kind of like tailing your logs, right here from Vapor. Now, if you've ever dug into AWS CloudWatch, you know that this is not actually the funnest thing to do in the AWS dashboard. So you can see right here, I've had some exceptions thrown, and they're all showing up here in my logs. I can go into the queue side, see what's happening there. There's that command we fired, that fail command. Something went wrong. You can see I've got something logging from my scheduler, which is running every minute automatically without any configuration from us. And if something else comes up, it will just update live right here in the Vapor UI. So it's really nice. If you get an error, you can hop in here, see what went wrong, fix it in your application. Really nice, especially while you're developing, like in your staging or testing environments. All right, you can also search these logs. So if you wanted to query by something, you know, you can search the log and just sort by a certain phrase. I've been throwing a lot of exceptions, so who knows if this will even come back. All right, so this will auto-update anything that matches that phrase, so I don't really have to refresh this page. Anything new that comes in that matches query exception will be updating right here in the logs. All right, so pretty cool. So databases. So right now we're not attaching any databases to the application, so let's go ahead and do that. So if I hop over to the databases screen, you can see the list of the databases that I have in this team. So I've got a couple here. We'll use the Laracon DB database mainly, but you can provision 2 types of databases in Vapor. So I can provision a fixed size database, which is a typical database where you pick how much performance do you want it to have out of the box. So if I go to create database, you can see right here, fixed size database. I can give it a name, and then I sort of pick, you know, what kind of specs does it need? How much RAM does it need ahead of time? And of course, you just pay Amazon for that database. These costs aren't really marked up or anything. You just link your Amazon account. What's the maximum disk size that I want AWS to scale this to? So you don't really have to, you know, you don't pick a fixed disk size. You just give it a maximum, and it'll start small, and it will scale you up in like 5 gigabyte increments up to your maximum. And then you can either make it public or private. So public databases, just get a username and password that you can access. You can access the database from your local machine. Private databases sort of live within your own isolated network. They can't be accessed by the outside internet in any way, even if you have the password. But the environment variables are automatically injected into your application so that it can use that database. All right, so how do we attach a database to an application? So I have this Laracon DB. Let's attach it to this test application. I'll go to my Vapor config file, just add a database key, Laracon DB, which is just the name of the database. I will just fire off another deployment. go watch that deploy. And again, we don't really have to do any other configuration. We don't have to worry about the environment variables. We don't have to flip any other switches here. Vapor is going to make sure that all the right information we need to connect to that database is already injected into our application. So once that deploys, we'll see if we can hit this database. I've got this little test route out here called database, where we're just going to pull everything from the user table to see if we can access that. Come on, Amazon. All right, so we're finishing up here. Let's go ahead and hit that database route. All right, so it looks like we pulled back a couple records here, and we can see that everything's working correctly. All right, so really easy to attach that database to our application. So that's a fixed size database. Now, you might have noticed I have a serverless database. So how this works is you create a serverless database. You don't have to pick how much RAM it has. You don't have to pick how much disk size you need. It will automatically scale based on the demand on the database. So you attach it to your application in the same way, and you just kind of forget about it. Amazon will automatically scale it for you. You can view information about it here in Vapor. And if I scroll down, you can see you actually get metrics. So let's go through our database that we attach to our application. And if I scroll down here, you can see I get my max connections over the last 24 hours, my average connections, and my average CPU utilization over the last 24 hours. And also I get charged for each of those statistics. So again, this database not being used very heavily, so my free disk space pretty constant, not using hardly any CPU at all. And I can also set up alarms for these metrics as well, just like on the environment. So I can tell Vapor, hey, if my max connections are more than, say, 100 connections for 5 minutes straight, email me about that. I set up that alarm. I can set up alarms on CPU utilization or whatever else I want to monitor. All right, so really easy to manage that directly from Vapor. All right, what about database scaling? So I told you this was a fixed size database, and does that mean that I'm stuck with this size forever? No, actually you can scale this database directly from the Vapor UI. So if I go to this context menu, I can hit scale and pick any new size I want to scale this database to, and it will be scaled for me, and that's all I have to do. I can just continue using my application. Again, with a serverless database, you don't really need to worry about this. What about backing up and restoring my database? Again, I can do this directly from Vapor. So what's really cool, again, if I go into this context menu, I can pick restore, and I can restore to any point in time in the past 3 days. So what I do is actually give a name to my restored database. So I'm going to call this Laracon restored. I'm going to pick, like, say, yesterday at this time, and I'm going to hit restore. And what that does is actually create a new database matching the same specs as the old database, and it puts all the data in it that existed down to the second for that point in time. So you don't really have like hourly backups or nightly backups or whatever. It's just point in time, down to the second, anytime in the last 3 days. You can create a new database that replicates one of your other databases exactly. So it's really easy to restore your databases. You don't have to worry about setting up any cron jobs to do that. It's just kind of baked right into the UI here. So that's going to provision for a while. We won't sit here till that's done. But really easy to do that and not have to worry about did you remember to set up database backups when it's too late. All right. So let's talk about private databases. So this is a private database. I mentioned there's 2 types, public and private. If it's private, how can we interact with it? And Vapor lets you do this in a couple of ways. So one quick way is just from your terminal. So I can do Vapor database shell Laracon DB. And that puts me into a MySQL shell for that database if I have permissions to that database in Vapor, if I have permissions to update that database. And then from here, I can run queries against the database and get results, which people are apparently putting stuff in here. All right. Also, there's another way to access my database. I can go into the network here. And I mentioned that we put you in your own isolated network. This is all done for you. Don't have to worry about this too much, kind of a power user feature in here. But you can create a jump box, which is a tiny little box that we put within that private network, and we give you the SSH key to that box. And what that means is you can come into something like Table Plus or a database GUI and use that SSH key to connect to the database, and then you can manage the database right from your GUI client on your local machine that you're used to. All right, so really easy to do that as well. All right, let's jump into caches. So this works very similarly to databases. You can create Redis clusters directly from the Vapor UI with as many nodes as you want in the cluster. So I've got one here called Laracon Cache. Let's go ahead and attach that to the application in the same way. Actually, before I do that, let's see what happens if I hit this cache route before I attach the cache to the database, or to the application. So in my config file, you might remember we just added that database thing. We didn't add anything for caches. But let's go ahead and hit this cache route and see what happens. So we're just going to try to put something in the cache and then get it back out. All right, so if I go to this URL, go to cache, DynamoDB, you can see I dumped out as my cache driver, and it did work. I did get Taylor as the result. So what happened here? And what happened is, if you do not specify a cache to an application, we automatically create a DynamoDB table for that application that can serve as a cache. And Laravel has a DynamoDB cache driver baked into the framework. So if you don't really need a Redis cluster for your application, maybe you're just doing a few basic cache operations, you don't have to do anything. You can just deploy and start using the cache. No configuration at all. DynamoDB is totally serverless. It's totally auto-scaling. You don't have to think about it. This also works really well if you're just using like the scheduler in Laravel, and that's really all you're using the cache for, maybe to prevent like your scheduler jobs from overlapping. This works great for that as well. But if you want a little more power and you want a little more speed, you can create a Redis cluster. So let's go ahead and attach that to the application. Just like we did database, basically, we're just going to say cache, Laracon cache, Vapor deploy production. That's going to attach all the right environment variables we need to make this happen. Again, putting our assets out on CloudFront. And once this updates, we should be able to hit this cache route and see that our cache driver has been automatically changed to Redis. The Redis C extension for PHP is already installed in the Vapor runtime. We don't have to worry about that, so we know we're going to get great performance. And then we'll be accessing this Redis cluster without flipping any other switches or injecting any other environment variables manually on our application. So it's really easy to attach these clusters to your projects. All right, let this finish up. All right, so that should be active now. You can see it switched to Redis. Our cache is working. We didn't have to worry about any other configuration. We can just continue using our application. Now, what's really cool is, say we want to scale up our Redis cache. Right now, I've got 2 Redis nodes on this cache, and I can just go right into this context menu, bump up those nodes to like 3 or 4, and start scaling it, just that easy. All right, and that's going to do, your app is not going to go down necessarily. When you do that, people can continue using the application while your cache is scaling. Also, just like databases, we get nice metrics here about the cache, how much CPU we're using, our cache hit rate, how many times we're hitting the cache, how many times we're missing the cache. We've got a pretty good hit rate right now on these last few hits. And also the CPU utilization across our individual nodes in the cluster. So if you're like me, before something like this came along, it would be really intimidating for me to manage Elasticache clusters, to manage RDS subnet groups, to manage VPCs, to manage security groups and rules. And a lot of stuff is happening behind the scenes to make this as seamless as possible for Laravel developers to deploy serverless applications. All right, so that's kind of a basic overview of how the cache system works in Vapor. All right, so again, how do we interact with this cache from our local application? So while we're developing, it would be really nice to be able to sort of inspect the Redis cache, see what's in it, and maybe debug a problem in our application. And all these Elastic caches are within your own private network, so it's hard to access them from the outside. Again, we're going to leverage that jump box feature that I showed you of the network. And right here from my command line, I can do a really cool command called cache tunnel, where I give it the name of that cache. And what that does is open up a port an SSH tunnel to that Elasticache on port 6378, which is one lower than the default Redis port. And then I can go to any sort of Redis GUI application, local host on that port, and I'm right there connected to my cache. And let's see if we can put something in it here. Well, I don't know why it's not showing this, this variable, but I can connect to this cache and inspect anything that's in it and sort of delete them, add keys, whatever I need to do right here from my local machine. And then when I'm done, I can just close off that connection and close the tunnel. All right? So that's caches and cache scaling, cache metrics, and all of that. So what about queues? You'll notice in my configuration file, I didn't have any configuration items about queues. That's because you actually don't have to do anything. You don't have to add any configuration. You can just deploy and start dispatching jobs. So let me show you how that works. Let me get rid of Meta's griping at me here. All right, so I've got a couple dummy routes in this application. I've got a queue route, which is just going to give us a little dashboard, which I'll show you in a second. And I've got a dispatch route, which is going to dispatch some jobs out onto the queue. It's going to create sort of a payment eloquent model, just do like some dummy work. I think the process payment job sleeps for 1 second and then just deletes the payment out of the database. So just like a really simple simulated queue job. It's going to dispatch this payment received event, which is going to be broadcast to the front end so we can see all the jobs coming in live. All right, so what this looks like is if I pull in, let's go to this queue route. Let's see, people are already messing with it. You can see I didn't have to configure any queue workers, and as you can see, it's handling all these queue jobs pretty quickly, actually, considering they sleep for 1 second. This is all going to be dynamically scaling. If you've got hundreds of jobs coming in, no problem, no sweat. Everything's going to run really quickly. All right, so that's really all there's to say about queues because you just deploy and start using them. There's not a lot of configuration. Vapor configures AWS. It sets up event source mappings from SQS into your serverless application so that when a queued job comes in, it invokes the application, processes the job using all the normal Laravel queue worker stuff, and everything works basically exactly how it would work on any other server, like a DigitalOcean server. So really painless. All right, let's talk about the scheduler. That's something else we haven't really talked about. That's a nice piece of Laravel. So as you already saw, if I come into my console kernel, I was logging out some information from that schedule command, just log info scheduled function called every minute, and we can see that was being written to the logs. Again, this is all set up for you. We set up CloudWatch rules to invoke this every minute, to call the schedule.run command, and all of your stuff runs like normal, just like it would on any other VPS server. You don't have to do anything. You don't have to add anything to your configuration file. You just deploy with Vapor, start using the scheduler immediately. No configuration at all. Custom domain. So we've already been using a custom domain a little bit, so I want to show it to you in the UI, though. There's actually a separate page for domains. And what's really cool is I can even purchase domains right here from Vapor, which will be on my AWS Route 53 account. All right, so say secretproject.com. It goes out and sees if that's available. It's not, unfortunately, but it gives me some other recommendations for domains I could purchase. If I purchase a domain right here from Vapor, we automatically create a wildcard certificate for it. We automatically create a DNS zone for you. All that's taken care of. They all automatically renew, of course, for free, and you're ready to go. If you do not purchase your domain through Vapor, of course, no problem. You can just add a domain right here, a domain you already own. It doesn't even have to be on AWS. It could be through some other registrar like hover.com. Once you add that domain, we can drill into it here. It's going to give you the name servers you can use. Again, this is optional. You can manage all of your DNS right from Vapor, so you have everything in one spot. If you don't want to do that, you just manage your DNS wherever your domain is registered. And if you choose to do that, you may have noticed in the deployment output, we give you the CNAME records that you need to add to your registrar to point your domain to your serverless application. So this DNS part of Vapor is really cool, but an optional part of Vapor if you don't want to use it. Okay, so we can add DNS records, we can manage DNS records, and you can see some of these are grayed out. These are records that Vapor is managing for us, which we'll talk about in a little bit, but it's managing that CNAME record to get my domain onto pointed to my serverless application. It's doing some stuff with SES, which we'll see in a second, and whatever else. And then we can see my certificates for that domain. Again, we automatically make wildcard certificates. you can request a new certificate if for whatever reason you wanted to do this, using DNS validation, which will be renewed automatically forever, or using email validation, which you have to do manually every 2 years, but if for whatever reason DNS validation doesn't work for you, you can do that. But most of you will probably use DNS validation. And once that's issued, just takes a few minutes. We already saw in my Vapor configuration file that you just attach the domain to the environment using the domain key, you deploy, and you're done. Vapor will automatically add those CNAME records, and if you're not using Vapor for that, you can add them to your registrar, and you're ready to go. All right, so really easy to use or even purchase custom domains right from Vapor and attach them to environments. So mail. We saw that Vapor added some DNS records for SES when we were on that DNS screen. And what that does is automatically set up the DKIM validation for the domain. It automatically validates that you own the domain. It handles all that DNS stuff for you when you deploy. So when you deploy, we also inject the environment variables to send email through Amazon's SES service. If you don't want to use that, you can just inject your own mail environment variables to use something like Postmark or Mailgun or whatever else. But you're free to use Amazon SES, and all you have to do is start sending mail. So I've got a route out here for mail where I just send a test email, say maybe a flight was updated, and I don't have to configure any environment variables. I don't have to do any other configuration. Vapor does it all for me, so that if I hit that route /mail, it will just send for me, and that's really all I have to do. Don't have to do any other configuration. File uploads, kind of the last big piece I want to talk about. So when you're used to working with sort of traditional server-based PHP applications, you have to interact with, so you may send your files straight to your own server and interact with sort of the files, global super array or whatever. But with serverless applications, there's no, that's not really recommended. You can do it on Vapor applications, but there's sort of limitations around serverless applications doing this. For example, you can only upload files that are 10 megabytes or smaller, and so on. So what's really recommended is just to send your file straight to S3 directly from the client side. And this is really a good practice even if you have traditional server-based PHP applications. That way you're not bogging down your own web servers with files that people are uploading all the time. All right, so to make that happen, we have to do a few things, actually. How do we securely do that? How do we send a file from S3, or from our client straight to S3 in a secure way, maybe only for authenticated users of our application? And so how you do that is Amazon S3 has a feature called pre-signed URLs, which are very similar to signed URLs in Laravel, where we can ask the Amazon SDK and PHP to give us a pre-signed URL that allows us to upload a file onto S3, and then we can just push that file up using that secure URL, which maybe expires after a given time. So there's kind of a few moving pieces to make this happen. We have to ask our backend to create that pre-signed URL. We have to get that URL back on our client side, and then we have to somehow make like a request to send the file to S3 using that, and then we can ping our backend and say, hey, we're done uploading the file. So I thought that was like quite a bit of moving parts, so I wanted to try to make it a little bit easier. So I'm going to show you this little demo page I built to do this. Let's go ahead and log into this application. All right, so if I go to /profile, I built this sort of like little dummy profile page where you can just update your name and your profile image. And so let me jump into the code for this real quick. And because I didn't want you to really have to worry about pinging the backend to get the S3 URL, bringing it back, sending the file, blah, 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 I actually wrote a little JavaScript package that you can pull into your application that's out on NPM that lets you do a really cool thing called vapor.store. So this is just a little view component where I have a file input. When they click save, we're going to get the file input, which has like a ref on it, so I can access it in view. And then I'm just going to call vapor.store and pass it the file. What that's going to do is ping our backend to a route provided by the Vapor service provider in our application, get that pre-signed S3 URL, get it back, send the file to S3. It's going to give us the current upload progress to S3 so we can like show like a progress bar or whatever. Once it's done uploading, it's going to give us the stored file object that gives us like a UUID, the key of the file in S3, the bucket, the file extension, all that good stuff. Then we can ping our backend and say, hey, they're done uploading their new avatar. Go ahead and save this. And so there was another situation I wanted to try to prevent where, what if someone uploads the file to S3 on the client side and then they sort of abandon the rest of the action? They don't save their profile. Would the file just sit out there forever? No. So what we do with Vapor is we create a temp directory within your storage bucket for the environment. When you first call Vapor Store, we send the file to that temp directory. And any file that's in that temp directory for more than 24 hours, we automatically purge out for you. Or we configure S3 to purge out for you. And so then when you ping your backend in this, once this file is done uploading, what you can do is just copy over from the temp directory into a more permanent directory, like say an avatars directory, like I'm doing right here on lines 90 and 91. All right, so that's kind of how that works and how we avoid that situation. So basically, if I come in here to my page, I can just pick a new file, young me or something, hit save. You can see we get the progress bar, it updates, copies over to the permanent storage in S3, and we're good to go. So really simple. It did all that pre-signed URL stuff for us. All we had to do was really interact with vapor.store and hand it the file, and it did the rest of the work. So really easy. All right, so how did Vapor know to make an S3 bucket for us to even do this? Again, that's in my YAML file. You can see I have this storage. I can just attach this. I don't have to create anything in the UI. I just add it to my configuration file with a name I want it to have, and when I deploy, it will make sure that bucket's available. It will configure the auto expiration of that temp directory and all of that. All right, so that's file storage. So just a couple other tidbits to finish up. So what about, we've seen build steps that run locally on this machine, so like installing my composer dependencies and so on. But you can also have deployment steps. So these are steps that run while the application's in the serverless environment. So for example, migrating the database. I can't do that from my local machine. So what I do is actually add a deploy key here. PHP artisan migrate force, let's say, just like that. And now when I deploy, what that's going to do is all those build steps ran locally, but it's going to run those deployment steps actually on the AWS side. So we hop into Vapor, go to production, let it update our code, and then right here we're going to see it run those deployment hooks, and we'll be able to get the output for those deployment hooks to make sure it looks okay after they run. So that's how you would kind of migrate your database or anything else you needed to do on the server or the serverless side, so to speak. Let this guy finish. All right, so that runs, and you can see my deployment hook there, PHP artisan migrate force. I can view the output right here. Of course, we had nothing to migrate since we didn't generate any migrations. I can also view the logs for that, like if it failed to complete successfully, and kind of review everything. If one of these steps failed, nothing really goes wrong with your application in production. It's all atomic, so as long as you don't get to this last step where we update the function alias to point to the new version, you're still running the old version, and this is just a failed deployment that never got activated. So that's really nice. One last thing I wanted to show you is, so all the times I've been deploying, I've been doing it from the command line on my local machine or right here in the Vapor UI, but you can also deploy from your CI pipeline if you want to do things that way. So if we look at that test project we've been messing with, in my composer.json, you can see that here in a dev dependency, I've got the Vapor CLI right here in my composer file. So what that means is, of course, I can run Vapor commands from wherever. So in this example, like I'm using Chipper CI, which is a new Laravel-based CI tool that Chris Fidal and David Hemphill are building. Let me zoom this in a little bit. So let's pretend we're using this for our CI platform for this application. I'm going to jump into that Vapor Laracon project. Let's see. Go to my build steps. You can see I'm just running my tests, all that stuff. And I'm going to comment out this last deploy step, where we can just call into our composer vendor directory, PHP vendor bin vapor deploy production. I'm just going to save this deployment pipeline. Let's go out here and let's go ahead and get commit updated at Laracon. And then we should be able to push. All right, so you can see this build is pending out here. And this is actually really nice because then you just get that push to deploy functionality that you may be used to. You can just bake it right into your CI platform. Just going to run through this pretty quick, I think. All right, and that's going to deploy. Let's go out onto Vapor production. It's probably building our project. Pretty soon we should see a new deployment. There it is. You can see this was all triggered from the CI platform. So this is a really nice way to do things in production. You can have the CI platform run your test, and then when you're done, run your Vapor deployment so everything's right there in your continuous integration platform. All right, so really nice. All right, so what about testing your application locally? So we actually included a command in the Vapor CLI called Vapor Tests, and what this does is run your tests in a Docker container with the exact build of PHP that's running on Vapor. It also gives you MySQL and Redis available to you, and all you have to do is run Vapor Test. It spins up that container, runs PHP unit, and you're good to go. You've tested against the actual, literal identical PHP build that's running on the production Vapor installation. Now, we've done a lot of stuff in the UI. We've created databases. We've created caches. If we look at this Vapor CLI tool, everything I did on stage today, you can do straight from the command line. Create databases, scale caches. It's really nice. So like if I do Vapor database foo, should it be publicly accessible? Let's say no. I want to fix size, general purpose, can pick the size, all that good stuff. All right, so I'll just cancel out of that. We can even get metrics for the application right here on my command line. Last 24 hours, what's my stats look like? How much does that cost me on Lambda? The cool thing about serverless is when your application is not in use, AWS is not charging you for that use. So overnight, if your application is very kind of it's really busy during the day, but it's really dead at night when people go home, you're not really being billed at night for that application. And then it's scaling during the day, totally automatically, as much as you need. Really nice. All right, so that's kind of what I have today. Laravel 6.0, Laravel Vapor, robust serverless deployment platform for Laravel. Really nothing totally robust like this exists for any language and any ecosystem, so I'm really happy to get this out there for Laravel and kind of try to lead the pack into sort of an auto-scaling, serverless future for Laravel and PHP with automatic asset handling, database scaling, database restoration, cache scaling, domain, certificate management, CloudFront management, all done really easily for you with a nice UI. We'll probably be shipping this out in a few weeks for everyone to use. For right now, after this talk, I'll ship out this page out to be live in production at vapor.laravel.build. You can get your name on an early access list so we can get some more beta testers in there. The pricing will be really simple. It's the same price as the business tier of Forge, one monthly price, unlimited projects, unlimited deployments, unlimited team members. So I think you'll really like it. I didn't know what to think about this talk as I was preparing it because I felt like Vapor, when I'm using it, feels deceptively simple in terms of what's happening behind the scenes, where I spent 9 months poring over AWS docs and worrying about subnets and security groups and VPCs and routing tables. But I tried to do all that to give you a really nice, seamless experience so you can never think about scaling your servers again, hopefully, for a long time. All right, so stick around for the after party.